A quick intro here. We have Loretta Henderson. She is the founder of Women on Wheels, which is supporting women who do solo rides around the world. And she shared a little bit with me prior, and it's fascinating. Amazing inspiration to others. So she is going to share, the beginnings of how she got motivated, how she got into it, and the extent of the network that she has built. What we'll do for all of our other speaker series events is, I have the chat window up. If you have questions, please ask. If it's a clarification question, I'll find a way to get in and ask your question, or ask you to ask your question, but we'll try to pull them up till the very end. So Loretta will go until about quarter of, and then we'll go through the questions that have come in. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Loretta, and please introduce yourself and tell us about yourself and Women on Wheels.
Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you. I just first want to say thank you so much for letting me be part of your club here. And I will be presenting about Women on Wheels and solo female cycling. So I guess you heard my name's Loretta, and at the age of, let's see, I ended up, my World Bike Tour took me across over 50 countries, 5 years, and across the continents. And so I'm just going to open my presentation, and I'll just explain. First, I'll just introduce the book that I put together called Wow, Women on Wheels. And we are 100 women from most of the world's countries who have cycled in most of the world's countries. And the book ranges from the very first woman to cycle around the world, Annie Londonderry, and her trip was in, I think it was 1896, and her great-great-grandnephew wrote the foreword to the book. He got in touch with me and told me that he would, that his, basically his relative from a long time ago would be very proud of my cycling around the world. So she has become part of our book, but so let me just, okay, so when people hear that I have cycled around the world across all those countries, it usually leads to questions, and it leads to a whole lot of questions. And so tonight's presentation I put together is some of the most popular questions that I'm always asked about my world biking trip. And the question most asked of me always is, are you crazy? I have been asked if I'm crazy so many times, and I always say the same thing. And what I say is crazy only on a good day, and every day is a good day on a bicycle tour. And so how does this all start is another really great question. And so, there I am, I'm about 36 years old, and I have a career and a boyfriend and and a house and everything you think that you want, and I was not interested in any of it. I had a book about bicycle touring, and I just was reading that book for like years and years and years. The book was called The Adventure Cycle Touring Handbook. And so I had never cycled before anywhere, and never met a bicycle tourist. And I was just fascinated with this book. And this book had mostly men on bikes, doing different long distance bicycle tours. And I just read that book again and again and again. And I was, what I kept thinking was like, do women really do these things alone? And so finally, what did it was I found a picture of a man on a bicycle, and he had emptied out a milk jug and put water in it and tied it to the back of his bicycle rack. That picture did it for me, because I started thinking, I have no idea if I can cycle anywhere, but I know I can tie a milk jug to a bicycle rack. And so I went to England and I bought a bicycle, and this was years ago. So at the time, the bird flu was going around, and I I wanted to spread across the world on a moment's notice. So I named my bicycle Pandemic the Magic Bicycle. Not realizing at the time, and there it is, Pandemic the Magic Bicycle. And a dignified green. And my bike, Pandemic, is a roll-off touring bike with an internal gear hub, a very fancy pants kind of bicycle. And I just started right from that bike shop, and I tried to pedal to Ireland, and I'd never cycled before, and going up hills, and it was awful. I mean, it was just ridiculous. Like every pedal stroke was like, ow, ow, ow. My Achilles heels were like just openly creaking. You could hear them. And there was this one hill, I get to the top of this hill, and it's about a 5-mile hill. I pedal up to that hill, and I just, lied down on the grass, and I was like, how do people do this? The one thing the book never mentioned was like, everybody in this book is a lunatic. I simply can't do this. But after a while, it really became not much of a big deal. And then at that point, I hadn't planned on doing like a long bike tour, but after that hill, I just thought maybe this is going to work out. So I decided to go where I'd always wanted to go. So I flew to Thailand and I cycled to Mongolia, and then basically carried on from there. Yeah, and so
Loretta, this is Michael. Sorry to interrupt you, but we had a very germane question, and which is,
okay.
when did you start doing this?
Quite a while. I mean, I'm still bicycle touring, but the world tour started in 2009, long before the pandemic days. And I've got Pandemic the Magic Bicycle it's just crazy. But yeah, so 2009.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And so, how far exactly did I cycle is something I also always get asked. And I have never been good at math. I've never been into statistics. So I cycled around the world and really have no idea what my total tally was. I can explain what a daily ride would be. So pretty much it was every day at about 100 kilometers or 67 miles a day, usually 6 days a week. For years. And then finally I just thought, wow, like I might be missing a few things. And so when there was other opportunities, I would get off my bike or, go trekking with the new friends, and kind of took it easier after a while. But yeah, so the route that I took, after going from Bangkok to Mongolia, at that point, the route that I took was more or less like across Asia. And then at that point, I ended, I thought that was the end of it. And I returned to what I thought would be like a normal life. And that only lasted like a few months. And it was kind of hard to get a job. And I realized that, bike touring, you can do it for like $5 to $10 a day. And so that is when I basically hatched the plan to, I just thought, well, maybe I can just connect the dots here, and maybe I can just cycle around like the whole world. So that became, that started the bike tour. And so I flew to New Zealand, and I started heading west across the world. When I got to Australia, I decided I wanted to learn to sail. So I cycled the land and I sailed across the oceans. So at that point, I came up through Southeast Asia, and then north across China, and then Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, and then into Africa. And I didn't take buses, no more planes at that point, across Africa. And then I sailed to South America, and then I cycled across Patagonia in the wintertime. And then I ended just north of the equator at the Pacific. And so that took 5 years. And yeah, and so many people have asked, like, how far did you cycle? And, you know, I would always say 18,000 miles. I'd say 18,000 miles. And I actually met a sailor, and he just crinkled his face and he said 18,000. He's like, there's just no way you've come much farther than that. And so I upped it at that point to about 33,000 miles, mostly just because I like the number 33. And then I did figure out some, some definitions of what cycling around the world is. And there's many, there's equator distances and I don't know. So I ended up at the Pacific, and that was, yeah. Yeah. Okay. So other questions that I'm asked all the time about all of those places is, like, what were some of the, the highlights, or some of your favorite, some of your favorite places to sleep. And I just slept wherever you could possibly sleep, often at schools with families. This middle picture on this slide, I'm under the road in Namibia. So that day was just so incredibly windy. Wind like you just couldn't imagine. The wind that sort of rolls off the ground type of wind. It's like, 3 pedal strokes forward, 2 pedal strokes back. Or the wind gets so severe that I call it tacking, which is you literally cycle left to right and tack like a sailboat in order to go forward. Yeah, and the picture on the right is I cycled across. I did a lot of winter cycling as well. So because I was on a continuous route on this bike trip, I wasn't jumping around to like the best weather. So I hit blizzards, sandstorms, winter in Patagonia. Yeah, and so the one of the windiest, worst, most inclement weather things, which turned out to be great fun, when I cycled into Africa to begin that section of the trip, I ended up in a sandstorm in Egypt that kind of kept with me clear across the Sahara, but the sandstorm was behind me. And so my normal day of, 67 miles or like 100 kilometers was doubled, possibly tripled. I mean, I was absolutely flying in the wind with the tailwind, and crossed most of the desert, basically just being blown forward. I stopped sleeping with my tent. I was just doing a lot of open camping because it was just so windy, but fun, very fun, and a great way to make incredible distance. Yeah, so the one thing also that I'm asked like quite a bit is about safety. Yeah, I get asked quite a bit about like, is it safe or are you scared? And it's really interesting because more often than not, sometimes I think actually a solo woman like out in the world on a bicycle might be like safer than other people, because I was just always getting adopted. Like if anything, like maybe too much help sometimes. Just an incredible amount of kindness from pretty much everyone that I would meet. And you can see from the photos here, I mean, I absolutely love photography. And so that also is just a really great way to connect with people. And often just making friends with everyone. I mean, the best thing about a bicycle is what some people would call like vulnerability, because yes, you are, out there more connected. It's also just the best. It's just the most amazing way to connect when it comes to travel, by far. I mean, yeah. Okay, so back to are I scared? I will say one thing. So, obviously, like some things do go down. I mean, I was on my bike for 5 years and and loving it, but there were some sketchy areas. I mean, I met, banditry, security concerns on the road that I would reroute through. Some of Africa was just full on bicycle pushing for like a week. So in order to not take the truck route and like stay off some of the crazier roads, I would, my route into, through Ethiopia into Kenya was a series of trails. I mean, it was navigate with the mountains on the right, and like big old windy sand dunes on the left, and just push the bike for, like a week. But the great news is there was a lot of different tribal groups and villages, and the kids just loved meeting me and just pushing the bike. And I was teaching people how to ride my bike, and at one point I was like, wow, okay, with all of this going on, like, this is okay, I need a break from the pushing in the sand anyway. And that particular border post was about as non-border post as I've ever seen. It was 2 garbage cans and just it's just a rope across, and it's like, wow, welcome to Kenya. And yeah, I mean, it was just a non-border crossing. So some of my favorite experiences, there's a couple photos here. I'm on the Karakoram highway in the bottom right photo. The top left photo is a woman that I met in Iran. And yeah, and so the one thing is, in some ways, in some ways it's best on a world bicycle tour to sort of like forget about everything you've ever heard in a way. So the Karakoram highway in Pakistan is, I mean, people call it like one of the top 10 places. I might call it like the top 2 places I've ever been. It's a conjunction of 3 of the largest largest mountain chains in the world. So if you've seen the mountains, which I'm sure we've all seen a mountain, it's like it almost looks like a one-dimensional, because it's 3 mountains all crisscrossed together. You get the most scenic mountains that you could possibly ever seen. And because the road is engineered through the mountain, it's an engineering feat, like literally blasted through the mountain, you end up with quite literally glaciers on the main road. So it's like trekking or hiking in the backwoods for days, but that is what you're cycling on. And the people are just the most hospitable people I think I have absolutely ever met. I did do some camping until word spread that I was there. And then after that, it just became staying with families, meeting new friends. Yeah, I took a television interview there, at which point I just had so many people to meet and greet. And I'm friends with a few people that I met there. But that would be one of the highlights of my route, for sure. And then
Loretta,
yeah.
just one quick question. There were a couple of questions that came in.
Okay, great. Let's hear them.
Yeah, I thought that would be germane here. One question was, did you have like a pre-planned route in mind when you got started, or were you, going where you felt like, literally where the winds were blowing you at times?
So, I knew I was going west on a continuous line without buses or planes. So I basically was just heading west on whatever was available to cycle on. So there is, some areas that aren't necessarily like either security concerns or things that are best not to really cycle on. So I would just route lots of dirt, lots of bike packing, bike pushing, but more or less whatever west is how I was kind of structure / not structuring the route choices. Yeah.
And did you have a map or like a navigation aid or something? How did you kind of figure out how to get west?
Yeah, so I think I probably mentioned that I'm not heavy on the statistics, even though I can have those conversations, and I definitely wrench my own bike and kept myself on the road, and I have decent technical skills, but I kept it pretty low key. And at first, like at first I got so lost at the very, very start from not having a map. I don't know what I thought. I thought I was just going to guess my way around. I don't know what I was thinking. I was just so excited to be cycling, and I was just in such awe. I mean, my neck was killing. So yes, I was leaning over the handlebars, basically going, ow, ow, ow. And so I was getting lost like constantly.
Okay.
So I would just have a series of different paper maps. And then towards the end of like the 5-year trip, I got super good at like finding any kind of map that I could find, whether it was online or printed, and I would just remember it. Because it's kind of, to stop and hold a map instead of your handlebars is a little, it'll just slow you down so much. So I would just really just remember a lot of the directions. Yeah. And then, one of my favorite places for, and also too, when it comes to gear on a long trip, everything just breaks and wears out. So I did try the whole like handlebar bag with the map on it and like reading the map while cycling, but the bag eventually, I don't know, it just wore out or I couldn't replace it. I mean, I've driven to draw maps on my hands even now because on a bike, it's the perfect place. You got your little directions on your hand,
Well,
hands
that's
on your,
true. Yeah, you just have to turn your
yeah.
hand over and there you got it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also do have digital maps, but I kind of, again, weren't really using it. Sometimes I would meet other cycle tourists that had like the whole like cockpit on the handlebars. And I will say that that's definitely a great way to go. A great way to go. If you want to navigate with all of the gadgets, that's amazing too. And I have done that, but I more or less sort of, just because again, like a trip like that, everything just starts breaking. I mean, I think I had 6 cameras, either,
Wow.
like just a ridiculous amount of, you're just very hard on gear when you're like, cycling across sandstorms and doing whatever, it just, things break. So I kept it kind of low key.
Mm.
I did have a bike computer, so I was doing distances, but eventually, that breaks, you replace it 4 times and you think, oh, who cares? My legs know what 70 miles in a day is. I'll just follow my legs. So
Yeah,
yeah.
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 That's great. No, thanks for the answers.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what did I eat? I guess the best answer to this is everything. Everything. And yeah, like just everything. Um, Yeah, I mean, in some places there's not, I'll say, I like to always say everything, like most cyclists, just ridiculously hungry and eating and, skinny no matter what I do. But yeah, in some places there's just not a lot of options. So, just eventually it becomes, I know how far I can go with a bowl of oatmeal. So like try to do like a bowl of oatmeal every day. And then, that'll last like a few hours. Yeah, just basically everything and whatever's available. Yeah, a lot of places just have really, so some of my, one of my favorite countries for cycling food is probably, a lot of people would tell you Thailand, because Thailand's amazing and it has an enormous amount of street food. And for like a first bicycle tour, if someone wants to do that, Southeast Asia is probably the best pick there is, in a way, because of the food, and it's because of street food. So that's always fun to cycle there, because you're just always eating amazing healthy food, like right on the roadside. But one of my favorite places was crossing the Sahara Desert in Sudan. Was just, it's just one of my favorite memories. So there's camels out in the Sahara, and you're basically doing slalom around camels on a bicycle, which is just wild and fun. And they don't really get out of the way. They don't chase you. They just don't move. And so along the way, you're like basically going around camels with your day. And then all the villages are making out of their own, it's made out of rock. It's like a giant rock, looks like a giant rock vase. It's an old fashioned heater in a way, but Sudan style. And they're slow cooking beans on that. And every village and every region has a different spice group. So basically for the entire time that I was crossing and, like hanging out with the camels, which I love, you'd stop, and every day it was beans and homemade breads every day. And so the picture on this slide, he's actually a bread maker from Pakistan, but it's quite similar to here. So every day was like fresh bread and beans, like that's it. That's all there was, but it was filling. It's, you know, cheap, filling, healthy, never got boring. Perfect for cycling in sandstorms because there was a lot of those going on too. And yeah, and like in a way, I mean, in a way, I'm not, you know, I'm not like the biggest person as it is. I'm about like 5'1" and like, you know, like a buck and change, like soaking wet. Like I'm not a very big person anyway. So in some ways, I just got really skinny at some points, and then would just gain the weight back later when I got to a place that had better options for food, which works, you know. Yeah. So yeah, so one of the things I think, like, you know, like all of these wild adventures, whether it's like a world bicycle tour, or yeah, whether it's like a world bicycle tour, or a day ride, or a hike, or like whatever it is that brings you out of your comfort zone and like challenges you, I kind of think that that's like the whole point behind all of these adventures. I mean, most of these adventures that, you know, whatever it is for you, it's really about coming out of your comfort zone and like challenging yourself. And that's sort of like where the reward is for like all the other areas in your life. So the one thing about this bike tour is you kind of end up, in a way, it becomes like this, like, I think the reason, like, it was just, I just love the lifestyle, and why so many people just love the bicycle touring lifestyle, is you kind of become like a you sort of end up feeling like you're a better global, not sure the words, a better global like ambassador or like citizen in a way. Because it really just takes things back to basics, and it's just a beautiful way to connect countries and cultures and languages and foods, and it's just the most phenomenal education. um yeah, I mean, it, even after 5 years in a whole world in 50 countries, is still not old to me. You know, it's still something that I just, it's just, yeah, basically just love it. And most bicycle people who bicycle tour do too, I think. Yeah, so favorite countries, you know, really, I mean, the easiest answer to this is probably, oh, too many, too many. But I guess one of the reasons to have a country become like a favorite country is probably like a memory you just can't get out of your head. So I have a few, but one would be Mongolia. In Mongolia, what happened that day was just, it was just, oh, it was amazing. So the sun set. So I was able to cycle across the Gobi Desert in Mongolia before roads. So I was just navigating quite literally here with, you know, if something goes wrong, I know there's train tracks 38 miles, you know, to the left of me. And I know China's ahead. So, and it was just a series of like dirt trails. I always called it like, on the Solo Female Cyclist website, I describe this as cycling, navigating through a bowl of spaghetti. It's just a series of trails, and you just basically are picking one and just trusting it and just going because there's no other way really to navigate across this. So I'm out in the desert, and what happened was the sun was setting on one side of me as a giant, beautiful, beautiful moon was rising, and I ended up cycling not even on a road, just clear across the steep desert under a full moon for hours with full visibility. And so Mongolia easily becomes one of my favorite places. And then also, in terms of favorites, I'll just tell you a quick problem, you know, that happened in Mongolia. I wrote a story. I write stories and whatnot. So I wrote a story called Half-Ass Helen, the Volcanic Butt Wound. It's probably one of my favorite cycling stories, and I'll just shorten it up here. I got 7 punctures, 7 flat tires, all the same morning. These little rocks with these little spikes on them were blowing around in the wind, and just kept multiple puncturing my tire. And I was literally sitting out there with I didn't really have any scissors. So I was sitting out there with my nail clippers, cutting the patches in half in order to try to, like repair the puncture, like the 6th one, the 7th one. And I leaned back while this was happening and I sat on a thorn. And so all of a week later, basically I ended up with a half-ass Helen, my whole bum swelled, and I ended up with an abscess and literally couldn't sit anymore on my bike seat. And so I had to push my bike to like across into China, and then ended up with I have a scar. I have a scar the shape of Mongolia on my butt from this wound. Yeah, I have a few scars actually from this bike trip. One is the Mongolia butt scar, and the other one is I have a pedal wound the shape of Argentina on my leg. And I have a bug bite gone wrong on the side of my leg in the shape of the continent of Africa, which again was just a crazy, crazy infectious mess. But yeah, all great memories.
Kind of like tattoos of sorts, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, hey, we had a couple of questions come in. I thought to bring it up. One was, were you ever injured? And that sounds like you sustained a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
So,
don't-
yeah, lots and lots of those mini wounds, like scars everywhere, shaped like, literally, they're all shaped like different countries. And then all sorts of what I just call like ow, 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 like moments, like endless, like ow, ow, like just leaning over the handlebars for like how many hours, and your neck is just like ow, ow. You can still cycle forward, but it's just slightly uncomfortable. But yeah, all sorts of mini wounds and injuries and scars like that. Yeah.
Okay. Another question came in is, did you take odd jobs along the way for pocket change?
No. So prior to the bike trip, I had a career. I had a career at the school district. I was a grant. I was like a community program development specialist and a grant manager. And I had bought land and built myself a house. So I knew it was time to move on from, it was 10 years that I was doing the education job. So I knew it was time to move on, like for a new chapter in life. So I ended up selling that property. So a combination of selling the property as well as savings is how I paid for everything. And then I became sponsored for the gear. So that worked out pretty well. Actually, interesting enough, this photo that you're looking at, a couple of gear companies published this photo, like a Ortlieb supplier. And so I was able to get free bicycle bags and in exchange for photos as well as magazine articles and things like that, but mostly savings. The cost of bicycle touring it's low. I mean, it's very, very low. There was days, days where it was $2, lots of places, a meal's $1. There wasn't much of a budget, but it always came in under $10 and often $5, but about $10 a day, almost any place in the world, really.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have a few more questions, but why don't I let you continue, and then we'll come back to questions in just a little bit.
Okay, great. Yeah, so any problems? When I finally got down to the bottom of Africa, so I cycled into Cape Town and I met somebody down there and they said to me, any problems? And all I could do was laugh and say, oh yeah. I'm like, definitely. But I made it here and that's really, really okay. And I'm fine, I'm still standing. But one of the things was I knew in coming down some of the roads I chose to go down, I mean, I absolutely knew I was going to get robbed. Like I knew it, every instinct in me. And it became to the point where every day I'd wake up and just think, rob me now, like just rob me now, like just get this over with, just end the suspense, just rob me now. And, and I mean, funny moments, like one guy looked, a very tall man, he looked at me and I just looked at him and was like, are you going to rob me? Like I just knew it was coming. There was just some serious banditry on the road. I'd met other cyclists that had been robbed. there was this one section actually of the road up in Egypt where I met, I think it was 6 or 7 different guys on bikes who'd been robbed. I was never robbed because of that sandstorm I mentioned earlier, blowing me so fast down the road. I just sped through there. So I think that was part of it. But eventually I did get robbed, but I wasn't hurt. I was upset for 10 minutes. And then I was like, well, I'm not hurt. Everything's fine, and just carry on. So yeah, so most problems in a way just became part of the adventure. I'm not sure you could actually bicycle tour around the world with 0 problems, and that would be boring anyway.
Egypt.
Okay, so yeah, is there more questions? Do you want me to answer? Or so this is there's 2 more slides. There's
Why
only a
don't you
few
keep
more
going,
slides.
and then we'll
Okay,
do
great. Okay, so where I've been, you know, the photo up on the left, where I'm pushing the bike there, that was in a mountain pass. So one of the things I would say that maybe not a problem, but altitude cycling, and this is great for people who love numbers, but I have YouTubes out there and podcasts, and Solo Female Cyclists on Instagram shares a lot of this stuff. But you know, the highest I cycled was some of the highest roads in the world. So they're like 17,500 feet. You know, they're up there in the Himalayas. And so you're basically just hardly breathing and cycling like over the mountain passes. Yeah, and so those are just phenomenal memories. And it's amazing what we can adapt to be able to cross like heights like that. And obviously in that picture, you can see I'm pushing, and that's because not only am I way, way up, that picture is actually in the Andes Mountains. I'm way up in the Andes there, bike pushing, because one, it's windy and the high altitude. And that day I was running out of time. I slept at the top that day in a hut because I just barely could make it. Yeah, and many days in terms of, you know, where to camp, where to sleep is sort of determined by what happens that day. So I quickly learned that like life is what happens when you're busy making plans. So there was a lot of planning that I was doing along the way, but none of it really worked. So I eventually became like not planning at all. I eventually just stopped planning because none of the plans actually ever happened, mostly because of weather, cold. Yeah. And then where I'm going. So I have, you know, I still do bicycle touring, but I've branched over. So after this bicycle tour, there was one area of the world I still wanted to explore, and that was Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, the Pamir Highway, which is actually, you know, of the famous world bicycle touring routes. There's Cairo to Cape Town, there's, you know, Alaska to Argentina, and then there's the Pamir Highway that's very popular. I decided to turn myself into a donkey, and I made myself a running cart, and I ended up running across the Pamir Highway years after the bike trip. And I now do like ultra marathons. Yeah. But the Pamir Highway is actually so famous for cycling that I thought I would mention it here. Yeah, and so yeah, those are some of my stories from my bike trip, and the book is definitely available, and the book is full of more and more stories. Yeah, and the book has got 100 other crazy women on wheels and solo female cyclists.
Wow, that's all I can say is wow. Whoa. Hey, so if it's okay, Loretta, I have some questions pulled up here, and why don't we roll through them? So
Great.
let's see. So one question was, how rural was your trip? The pictures make it look that way, and the question behind the question was, you know, did you have access to electricity every day? You know, how about phone or internet access?
Yeah, so you know, it was a 5-year trip, so I think 3 years in, I think it was, I finally bought a cell phone, and I was able to, in Africa, and that's actually the funny thing with the technology. So I mostly just had, in terms of the electronics I carried with me, I always had a camera of some sort, lots of cameras. I broke so many cameras. And then I finally got a phone and a SIM card and a connection. So I was actually in Zambia, so I was actually like in Zambia in my tent with the ability to tweet if I wanted to. And I remember thinking, is this a good thing or a bad thing? This was year 3. I was like, I am not so sure about this. So I didn't use the ability to tweet, but yeah, I picked up a cell phone like a couple years in from the Samsung store. And so the ability to stay connected in a lot of places, in a way, it has to do with modernization of the system. So Sudan's a great example of this. People are literally riding donkeys with cell phones around their neck. So there isn't public transportation, but they've got their cells, their Mobies. They're Mobies out. Yeah.
Incredible. Incredible. Another question was, where did you spend the most time in one place?
I took a writing break in Cyprus in order to write part of this book, but as well as part of the other book I have coming out. I stopped and took a break after, Middle East, and then between the Middle East and Africa. But I more or less just kept heading west and kept continuing on. I was pretty good at just continuing on forward and staying pretty focused at that.
Yeah, excellent. And then another question is, the question is, how did you get away with just one pannier, or with your pannier, maybe a duffel? You think that
yeah.
multiple, like a front and a back. So you must have been.
So my Thorn Raven touring bike that's named Pandemic, the magic bicycle, because I was going to spread around the world at a moment's notice. I started with the traditional bicycle touring setup with the front 2 bike bags, bike panniers, and the back bags and the rack pack. I started with 5. I kind of realized that what I really wanted or needed was 3. So I slowly got rid of the front panniers and then the rack. So for a while I had 3 and then eventually I had no panniers on the front and just the rack. And then finally I thought I don't even need the rack. And so I finally got rid of the rack. I always I'm not really sure. So I think I've always just kind of been a natural minimalist, to be honest. Yeah. Maybe that's why I love bicycle touring so much, but I found I really didn't need anything more. And that's a 4-season setup. So I did lots of, I hit blizzards on this trip and everything else. So that setup's good enough even for like a winter crossing of Patagonia, just with the 3 on the back.
Wow. Incredible. I have a question. You've gotten a bunch of compliments, people saying you're such an amazing journey and stories. And here's one. Did you have the same bike for 5 years?
Yes, absolutely. Pandemic, the magic bicycle. I still have that bike with the roll-off equipped wheel. Yeah, and I pretty much just maintained it, and yeah. I learned a lot about fixing things, although the maintenance on a roll-off bike is very minimal. I mean, I can fix like derailleurs and whatnot, but with an internal gear hub, there's not a lot. You have to change the oil, but there's not a lot of maintenance going on. But yeah, the same bike. Yeah.
I'm familiar with those internal gearing, and they're very impressive. They have a good reputation. There was a question that came in about what's a roll-off bike.
Yeah, so it's I call it my fancy pants European bicycle. Instead of the traditional derailleur for your chain, it's a gearing system that's inside the back hub of the wheel, and so it's known as like quick change. So it's basically not really, but it's like squishing the components of a traditional derailleur bike all inside the back wheel. If you Google what that wheel looks like, it is absolutely crazy complicated. It's like a crazy complicated clutch system but it's a quick change, and it's protected from the elements. So for like pushing, bike pushing across like the sand dunes that I've done, or the winter crossings of Patagonia where everything turns to ice, it's really very much protected. So you still have a chain to maintain, but you're not going to get anything gunked up in your gearing system because it's all inside your back internal gear hub.
Okay, great, good. Let me open it up and just see if people want to ask questions. Any questions from folks on the line? Oh, here's one that came in. Didn't scroll down far enough. Did you have ride buddies?
Yeah. So, a lot of people out there bicycle touring. So when I would meet people, so when I would meet people, we'd ride together for like a day or like a couple days, or if we're going in the same direction, for sure. I mostly was solo, just because of the route that I was on. But cyclists naturally connect and hang out. We got a lot in common, all of us cyclists.
It's true. No, it's very true. Okay. I have a question that was on my mind about the organization, or the WOW. Can you tell us like how you got started with WOW? Because it feels like you're the hub, so to speak, as a resource for women who have a similar interest.
So I met Jill. It took me 18 months to meet another solo female cyclist. So I met Jill on the road in Thailand, alone on her bike, bicycle touring from England. And she just said to me, "Thank you so much for saying hello. I'm a bit lonesome. I started to think there wasn't anyone out here." And I just said, I didn't know if women did these things alone too. And either. And I just said to her, "Well, of course, there's more of us out here. We just need to find each other." So I took her picture and I posted it on Facebook. And, in complete gratitude to the cycling community, mostly guys, actually, at that point, we put together the community. People just spread the word and spoke to each other. And then the community has started growing and growing and growing. So in the book is, I think I mentioned that it's like the history of solo female cycling. So it starts in 1896 with the first woman to ever cycle around the world, all the way up to present day. And then there's different people through the years. So there's a very famous Irish woman called Dervla Murphy, who I absolutely adore. And for great cycling books, if anyone wants to read a hilarious ride, get a hold of, it's called Full Tilt. She cycled from Ireland to India in, I think it was the 60s. That's a phenomenal book. But and so inside the big WOW book here is also like a reference. There's a whole timeline of, I call it read and roll. It's a whole bunch of different cycling books that run like on the spectrum. It's a community effort. Community effort. And I put it together as a thank you to the bicycle community who kept me on the road for all those years, so yeah.
All right, excellent. So another question just came in. Did you have to change your entire drivetrain in order to accommodate that, or did you buy the roll-off hub?
So my bike frame is roll-off equipped. So my bike came with the roll-off, but there is a way to add a roll-off to a standard bike frame. And you need to add or order an extra, I'm not 100% sure of the name of it, but it looks like a partial derailleur that hangs down that provides for chain tension. And so you can take a traditional frame and add a roll-off component to it, but you have to add the extra, I call it a drop down, even though it's not really called that. And then once you add that extra part, your traditional bike frame can be equipped for a roll-off.
Good. Other questions that people may have please, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. Other questions from people? What's your next adventure? Are you riding these days? Tell us what you're up to now and what's coming up.
So, I've done since the bike tour, I've been crossing countries on foot. So like fast packing, my last ultra marathon was, March 2020. And so, lately I've just been doing lots of trail runs, and I've been doing some writing to try to put together like another book. And yeah, I'm not really sure what's next. I'm up for anything.
Okay.
Yeah. At some point, maybe a sailing trip. Yeah.
Oh, okay. How did you morph or go into the running from the cycling? We had that photo of you pulling along that cart behind you.
Yeah. So of the bicycle touring routes that are available, the Palmyra Highway is one of the classics. And I just wanted to see the Palmyra Highway, so I just thought I'd try something new and went on foot. I mean, I told everyone that I met, because there's so many cyclists on that route, I told everyone my first love would always be bicycle touring, and it very much is. Yeah, so I would go back to Africa. I would go back cycling in Africa. That's probably one of the still remains a memory, and there's tremendous amounts of both road and dirt cycling options available. So I would love to go back bicycle touring in Africa again. There's so much to explore there. So much. Yeah. And at the time that I cycled across Africa, I came up with a new hobby. I was photobombing like the wild animals and stuff. And that's always fun too, cycling with elephants. Yeah.
That's so great. Good. Hey, another question just came in is, how is it to adjust to regular, in quotes, your lifestyle, after your 5 years of touring? And have you
that's a great question. Thank you, whoever asked that. It's yeah, so I don't really have like the greatest answer for that, because as soon as I was, finished with my bike, there was moments where I was like, I would not recommend a bicycle tour. Like there was days where I was like, I don't feel normal. And then I just realized, well, why would I feel normal? I've been like, every morning you wake up and you like pack your tent and you're brushing your teeth and you're pushing a bicycle and you're like, wow, this is normal. And you're like, this is not normal behavior. Like bike, like you're getting ready for your day, and all like multitasking while camping. And so yeah, I think it's a bit of a challenge to flip back, but I guess it's as much as you'd expect when you do something like cycle across all of those countries for all that time, and it's always just an adjustment. Yeah, but no, I'm right back to where I was. I adore bicycle touring. I highly, highly recommend it. Definitely. But it took some time. It definitely took some time to adjust back to a more like whatever, quote unquote, normal existence.
Yeah.
Loretta, I have a question about your photography and cycling. And you went through all these cameras, and it sounds like you didn't take a computer with you. So like, how were you processing images while you were traveling? And you broke some, so you must have been processing them on the road. Were you carrying the camera like around your neck or on a strap, or was it in a bag, or like, how did all that work?
Yeah, so I actually did have a little computer with me that I named Prozac. Yeah, my computer's name is Prozac. Basically because like writing would keep me bicycle touring forever and ever. It's the greatest way to process. And I was writing, I was building the Wow Women on Wheels community, as well as doing a lot of magazine writing. So I had my little computer that, was just in a neoprene sleeve, and pretty tough. I had two. The computer would last. My computer lasted way longer than the cameras. The camera problem in terms of breaking them was really more like user error. I'll completely own that. That was my fault many times. Like, you shouldn't really be whipping out your camera when it's like sand is blowing around, and then you ruin you ruin the lens of your camera, and you're like, oops. I was like, wow, okay. I jumped one in the ocean while I was sailing across the Atlantic. Wasn't my, again, I would like to say it wasn't my fault, but it obviously was. Um, so I just would have my electronics like in my bag, but mostly just a little bag of, like the tiniest cords that I could find. Always, just trying to keep the weight down, and keep things like protected. But, shockingly enough, a tiny computer in a neoprene sleeve, I mean, bouncing around. I always wondered why it wasn't breaking, but the computer was tough. I mean, I bounced it many, many times, and really just hung in there. And then, yeah, and just I was posting photos the entire time, like on like on the Solo Female Cyclist website. And then the older one is skelatitude.com. And so, yeah, I just, yeah, and there's lots of Wi-Fi available as well. And so, eventually after you like come over that mountain pass, or, one of the longest mountain routes was Paso San Francisco, in the Andes. And that was I ran out of food on that one, actually. It was supposed to be like 11 days. And when I left left across that remote area, I had, like, quite honestly, like, I had walnuts hanging off the handlebars. I had everything packed on that bike, as much as you could pack. And I just hit like crazy cold weather that was like unbelievably high winds that you just could not even do my tacking technique, as I call it, which is just go left and right across the road until you go forward. So I was just sheltered in this old broken building for like a couple extra days, and then would just come over that mountain. And then even that, like, it's like the end 2 days of that, I was like, oh my goodness, if I don't eat something, like, I'm like, I don't know what's gonna happen. I felt like my stomach was like eating itself. But and then even in a remote tiny town like that, there'd be Wi-Fi available for photo processing, Wi-Fi. I was making phone calls through Wi-Fi. So it's pretty easy nowadays to stay connected. A lot easier than I thought, actually.
Wow. One last question, and we're at the top of the hour, but if there are any other questions, I want to give people a chance.
If I can pop this in, Loretta, when you were coming up to a city, whether it's Durban, South Africa, or La Paz, Bolivia, would you stay toward the rural outskirts of it, or would you just dive right into the big city with all the traffic and urban?
Yeah, so I was pretty determined that I wasn't getting off that bike. So I'm not sure I would make the same choices now, but I cycled like straight into Jakarta, Indonesia. Don't recommend it. Craziness. I literally had what I call pollution rash on my legs. I called it pollution rash. I don't know what was happening in my skin, but I just broke out in rashes from the pollution in the air. Big black mark around my face, from breathing. I would just go straight through it. Getting out of Bangkok was like, I was like, okay, I'm definitely going to die today. It was just crazy traffic. And yeah, so I just didn't really ever take any public transportation options or whatever. So if it was on my route, I was going, and that included, mountains, deserts, cities, winters, heat. Yeah, I just went. I did my best in Africa to route never into the cities, which was easy to do. And there's so many rural areas that you can go around that I would normally take like the trail instead of going into a city. But in Asia, the cities are somewhat there's no way to go around them. So I would just have to go through them, and I would.
Oh, what an incredible tour you had. And I'm very appreciative, Loretta, for your making the time to join us this evening. It's really inspirational and interesting, fascinating. This is great. So a genuine thanks from the Grizzly Peak cyclists for your joining us this evening. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that I just love connecting with other like-minded people and cyclists, and it's just great to be speaking and to be part of this with other cyclists. So I just really appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Good. And thank you, everyone. Grizzly Peaks, Grizzly Bears. I'm glad you're able to make it. All right. Well, have a good evening, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.